Now, just to talk about Dr. Reetz, he is a senior research fellow at the Zentrum Moderator Orient and external faculty member of political science at Free University Berlin. He is principal investigator for political science South Asia at the Graduate School of Muslim Cultures and Societies at Free University Berlin since 2008. Since 2011, he is academic advisor of Eastern Economic Forum Davos for South Asia, attending the Global Agenda Council on Pakistan and Indian Economic Summits. The focus of his research is on global Muslim identities with special emphasis on Southeast Asia, Central Asia as well as Europe. His notable publications include Islam in Europe, Religious Life Today, 2010, and Islam in Public Sphere, Religious Groups in India, 1900 to 1947. This came out in 2006. He co-edited a themal issue of Journal of Comparative Studies of South Asia, Africa and Middle East on South linkages in Islam in 2007. Now, before I give the mic to him for today's this thing, we will like to felicitate him by giving a memento. And before I call upon him to give today's oration, I will briefly like to tell some things about Dr. Engineer, something about our center. Though I'm sure most of us who are here today are doing very well about Dr. Engineer and our center, but still, I feel like just be a brief recap of the person in whose memory we are holding this lecture. This is like the record. And I'm not going to give that Wikipedia Google introduction, because he had been too close to me, and I would like to unfold as to how I saw him. That's very important for me. First time I heard about him was in the aftermath of Babri demolition, Mumbai violence. That time I was teaching in IIT, and I really felt very helpless for the first time as to what is going on. Then I heard that there is some meeting which has been organized by Asghar engineer in Santa Cruz office. I didn't know any of that. There was some office, etc., etc. So I landed up with my friends, some from IIT. When we entered the small flat where the office was located, practically we could not enter it because the hall was absolutely full. So with difficulty, I made some room for myself in the balcony, heard the proceedings, and I was so surprised that Asghar Ali was sitting on the floor. People were standing, whoever was getting any chair, they were standing and listening to it, and very systematically he was conducting the meeting. We were discussing about Behrampada, Peace March, rehabilitation, what can be done, etc., etc. That was my first major interaction with my very close and dear friend, Dr. Engineer. After that, another friend decided to invite him to IIT for a day-long session. And that day-long session also had such a profound impact on me. What he spoke was nothing new in a way. It seemed that, oh yes, I know about Mahmud Ghaznavi, I know about Muslim rulers, I know about Islam, etc., etc. But at the end of it, you know that there is a totally new presentation of things. That time I was very disturbed in staying in IIT, that after Babri demolition, suddenly there is a spurt of anti-Muslim sentiments which was coming out very vocally. Oh, Muslims are descendants of Babar, they should go to Pakistan, they should go to graveyard. So when I heard Dr. Engineer once and then again and again and again, I realized that there is a particular way of looking at history, way of looking at things, and then that was one very great learning process for me as far as I am concerned. That prompted me to keep going to office in Santa Cruz, and there I saw so many facets of his work. And one by one, I started coming to know how regularly he is publishing Secular Perspective very fortnightly. And I was so keen to see every new issue. So that I picked up friends in the office, and I went to the old files of Secular Perspective. And there I saw how systematically, methodically, on regular basis, the issues related to communalism are being commented upon by him. Then sitting in the office, I also came to learn about his very great involvement in Islam, and Islam and Modern Age was another publication which I kept seeing at the regular time at that time, but more seriously much later. much later. Now at the same time when this was happening, we were trying to engage more with the community work, and we means in that not Asghar Ali himself, but some of us like Uday Mehta, Irfan and others, we thought of trying to revive one organization which he had formed earlier, and that was Ekta, Committee for Communal Amity. Its basic idea was to provide a platform to cities' progressive left trade union elements to come and articulate their opposition to the communal rising communal violence and communalism, and through that then we kept organizing some of the events. Now during this period, one thing then again realized that center was doing two things very systematically apart from others. One was to have a chronicling of communal violence in India, and that became a sort of a landmark of center's contribution in the academic and the social work. And every year, last two issues of Secular Perspective, Dr. Engineer was devoting on this communal violence, which became a sort of a reference point for different scholars and activists to refer to that. And I'm very glad in the same tradition, our friend Irfan is continuing the same work of chronicling violence and writing on that regularly on that. So that was one aspect. Second aspect, then again, one kept coming across his books on different issues related to that. Now that was one thing which I realized, that he has been constantly monitoring, not only monitoring, investigating himself also. There are many communal violence which he himself went and investigated and also monitored. So this was one aspect of the work. Second aspect I learned was that how regularly, passionately he started writing against communal politics for secularism. That was again a constant stream of books and things which I kept learning of. Third thing which I realized was by which initiation was through a phone call from Irfan, Dr. Engineer's son and my very close friend. He rang me up one day that Ram, Daddy has been attacked at the airport, you come immediately. And then when I found out that it was through his work, because of his work on reform in the Bohra community, and there I realized charity always begins at home. So, and then we tried to investigate, we tried to learn about this Bohra issue and his mammoth contribution in the Bohra reform process, for which I think he was attacked 4-5 times. One or two of these attacks were very serious also. So that's where I came to know one third aspect of his thing. The fourth aspect of his work I again learned and took seriously, which I mentioned about Islam and modern age, and that I realized the worth of that after 9/11/2001. Suddenly I ran for cover, how to understand, something has come up, Islamic terrorism, and what is Islam, what is terrorism, then again the issues of Islam and modern age. So these four major aspects of his work. And apart from this, of course, my interaction with him became so close that once his autobiography came, half of his autobiography was practically I was knowing, because through travel, through seminars, wherever we went, we were sharing what he was doing, his earlier experiences in life. So that was also, I was very privy to many of the things which he later on wrote in autobiography. Now coming to center, again a personal account, when I became close to Asghar Ali and the center, which in a way are synonymous also. First thing, the basic idea was that in the society there are a lot of misconceptions, there is a lot of social common sense, because of which the orchestration of communal violence becomes easy. So to reach the truth behind these things, the center should be active, apart from Asghar Ali's own writings. The idea was that, of course, he himself was very involved all over the country, giving lectures in different universities. He was conducting police workshops, which we also took up a bit later. He started doing, and then center followed. It was like that. Center then. So first major thing which we planned along with him was this peace and conflict resolution workshop. The idea was that the lectures which are being delivered, the occasional workshops which are being given, should be slightly more structured, so that the work which center is doing at one place starts being done at different places in different points of time in the country. That was the basic idea. So we started the experiment of peace and conflict resolution workshops, which were initially used to be for 7 days, then came down to 5 days, Then we modified it also, and then workshops also started being conducted for one-day workshop for teachers, two-day workshop for police, etc. So depending on the audience group, the structure of the workshop started being tailored so that we go for a particular audience section. So the idea from here, the idea was that now since we are disseminating it, there should be effort to create more peace activists. So the next idea which came up in the center was that of training of trainers. Now this training of trainers was meant that some of the people who are already exposed to these workshops, we go in depth with them, we try to deepen their interest, deepen their understanding in the society, so they can go and do similar type of things in their own area. So now this is where I think there is a point of time when we lost him, when we lost Dr. Engineer. But somehow, of course, his legacy is very strong, too heavy, it's not easy to live the way he was carrying on the work, and the intensity and the profound commitment which we had. It is really difficult to emulate. But after that, we thought, what is the logical next step of this training for trainers? So what struck us was to initiate some peace centers. Now, so we had come up to the stage of peace and conflict resolution workshops, training for trainers. Now what do these trainers do? Now these trainers, they do the community work through peace centers. So with that intent, we began this work, and I'm very glad to say that especially because of the efforts of Irfan and Neha in particular, 7 peace centers are going on, and in these peace centers, the basic idea is that the persons, they, along with the community, they organize events which are cultural, which are political, which are social, and they can be various ways. Like some people are doing film clubs, some people are doing cultural poster exhibitions, some people are interacting with the schools, some people are organizing games and other things. The basic idea is that different communities where the partitions of hatred have come up, those partitions are, we try to demolish those partitions of hatred. Number 2, then we try to disseminate the positive things through these centers. And last 3 years, I think many of these centers have picked up substantially. Obviously, it is not enough. I mean, we have a long way to go. The communal poison which is there in the society is too deep. Sometimes I do feel like, even to Asghar Ali, I used to say that, आप काम तो करते हैं इतना, पर मर्ज बढ़ता जा रहा है, जितना आप इलाज कर रहे हैं मर्ज उतना ही बढ़ता जा रहा है. Of course, but obviously, so we at the moment, this peace centers, of course, there are different reports, and I am not going into that. But point where we are stuck today, last 2-3 years, of course, on one hand, challenges are going up. On the other hand, funds are being stifled. They are drying up. Now, we definitely want to see that the peace centers, like we come across many of the good peace activists who are motivated, who have time, who have commitment, but we are not able to support them enough. So that's where we are stuck at the moment. And idea is that there should be a chain of these peace centers in different places where our activists are. But of course, despite the adverse situations, the center is trying to do its best that these peace centers contribute positively in the society. And lately, of course, from last 2 years, of course, mainly due to the efforts of Irfan, this one more stream we have added, 2 more things have been added under his initiative. One is the chronicling of terrorist violence. So far as I told you, communal violence was being monitored year by year. So with Irfan coming, he thought of this, he has introduced it. And second thing, of course, is this whole series of Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lectures. They themselves are becoming a very good phenomenon as far as the centers are concerned. Now, parallel to center, we were very thickly interacting with, we helped bring up All India Secular Forum. Now, All India Secular Forum, the basic idea was that these secular groups scattered all over the country, they have a common platform where they can share the ideas, discuss as to how our things can be going up. And for that, we are regularly, practically from last 10 or 12 years, we are regularly coming out with a newsletter, Secular Action Network. Now, this is some basic things which center is involved, and I am sure that in coming times, keeping the legacy of Dr. Engineer alive and strengthening it, we hope that these peace centers our work of regular monitoring communal violence, terrorist violence, our work of commenting on the communal events which are going on, and for which Irfan, Neha, myself, we keep writing on regular issue. Of course, not in the big papers, at least through network, through other different mechanisms, we keep doing that. So these are, in nutshell, the ideas that Center had undertaken, like trying to understand the phenomenon of communalism, terrorism, trying to understand the political phenomenon which are taking place under the cover, under the name of religion. So trying to understand that, and trying to reach these things to the people at large. And this basic thing, which is our big challenge, is on one hand to understand, second is to reach, and there we take a leaf from what personally I experienced, and on that note I will end, how a scholar, why a scholar does his study, why he does it, is basically to reach the community, to reach the society. And this personally I was once touched so deeply by seeing Dr. Engineer's own example. So this is one anecdote where I think we had one workshop in JP Nayak, Kalina, Bombay University. And Dr. Engineer and myself, we were both waiting early in the morning, around 9 o'clock. The seminar was to begin at 9:15 or 9:30. So we were both waiting outside the gate of the hall. Then we saw one of the resource person who was to speak in the seminar. He gets down from the taxi and he comes. So we just say hello to him, we greet him and all that. When we are talking to him, meanwhile I saw that the taxi person, the taxi wala, he doesn't leave. He gets down from his taxi, so he comes towards us. So I feel probably our friend has not paid him adequately. So he's coming to complain, my payment has not left. So I was just thinking like that. The flash came to mind. But to my surprise, that person comes, he does a respectful namaste to Asghar Ali and says, "Sir, आप बहुत अच्छा लिखते हैं, आप लिखते रहा करो." So this is where I see him, a deepest possible scholarship conveyed in the most popular and effective way. That's what I think Center will strive to emulate, and in this I have outlined the obstacle. I hope we are able to overcome these obstacles, so that what he envisioned and what we share his dream, that these type of things are reached to the people far and large. And thank you very much. I would like Dr. Reetz to give his oration.
Yes, I would like to say. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Dear friends, thanks a lot for the invitation. I hope everybody can hear me. मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि आपको अंग्रेजी आती है तो उर्दू या हिंदी बोलने की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है, लेकिन माइक का प्रॉब्लम है। अभी ठीक है। ओके, तो आपकी इजाज़त से तो मैं अंग्रेजी में बोलूँगा, लेकिन फिर भी मुझे उम्मीद है कि आप मुझे ज़रूर ठीक समझ लेंगे। So I want to start with my own association with Asghar Engineer and perhaps briefly explain why I was invited. We had a connection that goes back to 1996 when Asghar Engineer visited our research organization, the Center for Modern Oriental Studies, or Zentrum Moderner Orient in Berlin, as a guest fellow. The reason being that I was engaged in a project of research on South Asian Islam, and we were using this occasion to exchange our views and opinions on the various formation of Muslim thought, of Muslim actors, Muslim institutions in South Asia. The same year I was lucky to pay a return visit to Mumbai and to the center. I visited him, and then almost 10 years later I was invited by the Bell Foundation, the political foundation of the Green Party in Germany, which partly co-funded the CSSS in Mumbai to evaluate the center, so that I became part of an evaluation team and visited the center, where I got a detailed understanding of the working of the center, of its own personality, and of the concept of the center, and where I could get a very detailed view of the work that has been done. Our center is also having 24 of his books in its library, which shows that we found them important and relevant for our research. But when I was here, one of the practical activities that were undertaken, which I found more impressive on the activist side, though I am not an activist and I've never been an activist, will probably never be one, that he was conducting these workshops with the police force. Why I found that very important? Because I think a lot of our tension, a lot of our problems that we face in the field of religious activism or identity politics are very often based on ignorance, on lack of knowledge, on lack of communication, and not all of this lack of knowledge, not all of this lack of communication is based on ill intentions. And it is here where I must congratulate him that he gave the benefit of doubt to the police people, to the security forces, to take them on their human value side, to understand that you need to qualify the knowledge and the experience in order to appreciate the other person as a fellow human being with similar values and with similar ideas about life. Because after all, a religious frame or can always be seen also as a social frame, and the values that one religion holds can always be compared to values that another religion holds, and that also people hold who do not believe in religions, because that does not automatically mean you're not holding any values. So the human level of communication and interaction, which is also a work of knowledge transfer, I think that is and was a very valuable contribution that he did, and that would in those cases have a very practical and important outcome, to sensitize these people for the work they are doing and for the issues they are confronting. Today I will not be speaking so much about, or at all actually, about communal politics or communal violence, but about my own very specific research that I have recently undertaken, and where I basically, so the laptop works on its own sometimes, as you can see. I'm so sorry about that. I have no explanation for that. So apparently there's a program, and this is also another interesting repetition from yesterday's lecture, where also we had some problems with the presentation. I don't know what's happening here. Weird. Now what? It should not happen. I mean, I should be able to really speak and sorry to have another performance issue. It's not actually what is planned, as you can obviously imagine. So, what I suggest, well, if we do both, then figure around with it, then it will even be more problems. Yeah, but So actually I wanted to go back to this slide because I still wanted to speak on one point here, which is his approach to paying tribute to the social foundations of Muslims and Islam that has influenced my research, because what I will be speaking about are the activities of Muslim groups from South Asia outside the region, where they act in a trans-regional and transnational way as global actors, and where I suggest where we would you press the end. I don't think it is a good idea that we both try to solve it. I think I leave it at this way, and you can at least see something, and then it could be a better option to do it like this. Yes, hopefully it will be stable. Okay, so why am I talking about global Islam in connection with globalization? Some people believe that globalization has not much to do with global religion or global Islam, but that is a matter of interpretation, I would argue. So at first I will be discussing with you some of the theoretical and conceptual issues, and then I will go, as you already could briefly see, go into some pictures from my field research. So the first issue I'm raising is the connection, and is about the character of globalization. Globalization is often reduced to a economic and financial phenomenon. It is sometimes also reduced to a phenomenon of a very recent origin, and it is more generally defined as a compression of space and time, where connectivity and connectedness across distance play an important role. And because of the reduction to economic and financial issues, then it is often assumed it is primarily driven by the West, and that the so-called global South is at the receiving end, or is the object of globalization, in fact its victim. I am trying to show in what way religious groups and Muslims from South Asia in particular are appropriating a role of active and subjective agents, where they are not only part of globalization, but where they in fact are also a driving force of globalization in their own way, from their own perspective, where I believe we need to understand globalization as a pluralist phenomenon, which has to be seen from different angles and not just from one angle. And one expansion of the perspective that is necessary regards the depth and the different dimension of it, to go beyond economic and finance, also to include history, culture, religion, other non-economic factors like politics, which immediately will give us another perspective of understanding the situation. And when forces and institutions act on a global scale, sometimes new structures emerge, new what we call sediments of globalization. They sometimes in the new academic literature are called globalities. So in the sense, we are witnessing a process where various systems of globalities emerge, various sediments, products, outcomes of globalities, new structures, and the Muslims of South Asia, I argue, are part of this process. And in particular, so why? Because even what is often underestimated in the Western world, in the international literature, that South Asia not only plays an important role in global Islam, in fact, numerically speaking, and so to say, from a secular perspective, it is the largest player in global Islam in the Muslim world. Few in the West realize that 80% of Muslims live in Asia, and that out of them 600 million Muslims in South Asia are already more than twice the number of Arabic speakers, and yet they are often seen as living on the margins of the Islamic world. And outside the Arabian Peninsula, it's particularly Muslim groups from South Asia that are very adept at establishing local connections and trans-regional connections with other parts of the world within the Muslim world and within the larger Islamic system. This expansion, this global expansion, we can trace in different ways. One way is the doctrinal, the ideological path, so to speak. We had in the past Sufi orders and the networks of sheikh and disciples. There were Islamic armies and traders and scholars. We know that Islam per se has a global vision, a global perspective, the belief that the world is Islamic and that only parts of the world, other parts of the world have not yet understood it, and therefore the activity, the concept of dawah and tabligh exists, which is supposed to communicate this truth, so to say, from the theological perspective to those who are not Muslims at present. There have been sectarian divisions and competition and expansive activities beyond borders in South Asia. We had seen the Indian Mujahideen and groups like the Al-Hadith, Deoband, Nadwa, etc. We have seen the modern movements in the early 20th century, the Khilafat movement, then the Tabligh Jamaat emerged and the Jamaat Islami, modern Sufi networks. Said Ahmed Khan is the well-known and established Muslim rationalist, where he held the view under the influence of the Enlightenment era that God would not have given us reason if He didn't want us to use it, which, so to say, turned reason into a theological category, a very interesting approach that, so to say, shows both the influence of the Enlightenment discourse and also his own deep attachment to the primary sources of Islam and of the Quran. And we had even Muslim revolutionaries and socialists like Barakatullah and Ubaidullah Sindhi, which shows that Islam itself can be seen, can be viewed, can be operated from different angles depending on how it interacts with society, how it interacts with particular social frames and conditions. And because I always used to say that when Muslims, and for that matter it is probably true for any other major religion, will practice the religion, it is impossible to implement the spirit or the wisdom or the knowledge of God in an unselected manner, because any reading, any practice is a process of selection. You have to select what you're doing in this particular moment. You have to select what you emphasize. Every ritual, every practice is a process of selection and interpretation. And as the unchanged, the uninfluenced, so to say, transmission of the original knowledge is impossible without making this particular process of selection. And this selection process in itself gives the opportunity for every believer and for every group to adapt it to the circumstances that suits them. But we can also see, of course, a secular trajectory of the global reach of South Asian Islam and its mobilization in line with the social foundations of understanding Muslims and Islam and other religion as discussed earlier in connection with Asghar engineer. And the global reach of South Asian Muslim was partly brought about by the influence of the British colonial connections, leading to migration of South Asian Muslims to other parts of the empire, as was said that the sun never goes down over the British Empire. That means it was a global format of governance, economically, politically, with a high level also of mobilization and mobility, where not only South Asian Muslims but also South Asian Hindus went to other parts of the world. Before that came the spread of Muslim trading castes, often from Gujarat to East and South Africa, for instance, to Southeast Asia. It is well known that beyond and beside Arabic traders and Hadramis from Yemen, Islam came primarily from India to Southeast Asia. And today we have another level yet of expansion, which is brought about by the current globalization and the diaspora migration, expanding the presence of South Asian Muslims to the US, Canada, Australia, but also to the United Arab Emirates and to the Gulf area, to Saudi Arabia, for instance, which are not mentioned here, and which is largely a product of this recent stage of expansion. This process created networks of solidarity and support which are partly based on shared doctrinal values, but are also driven by social and economic concerns and opportunities. During this process, we could say in principle that we can see some Muslim globalities emerging, which act in different ways, where we use in academic analysis different terms to understand their mode of activity. One such term is translocal. Our research center has partly become known internationally by studying the phenomenon and the concept of translocality to some extent, where we emphasize that a lot of phenomena, especially movements, are not based in a particular locality but exist only because they are combining activities from in one locality and the other, where every network, so to say, has a translocal activity where it is expanding from a local focus to a focus that is also directed to other localities and to other places. So where a larger area and territory is covered. And this expansion can also be sometimes understood as transnational when the state level is involved and borders are involved. That's again another perspective that we use. There is the term also transregional when we emphasize that it goes beyond the region. So we are talking about processes where we have different terms, and these different terms emphasize different qualities of this process of expansion. And in this process, in which these groups are involved, we see what we call today world making. World making means, as a term, to give meaning to particular forms of interaction. That is, why are you connecting and what is your vision for this world? Why are you going out into this world? A notable example of this activity is the Tablighi Jamaat, which has its own global vision, and a global vision which in their offices, in the headquarters, is even symbolized by a map of the world where they themselves discuss which parts of the world we have covered, which we have not yet covered, which are stable in our influence, which are not so stable, and where we need to do more and where we need to do less. So they have a very clear global understanding where they give a particular meaning to their own outreach to other parts of the world. And why is this so important nowadays? It is so important nowadays because after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the systems of alliances and ideologies that existed before, we increasingly face what some call a global disorder, which is also a lack of shared norms of governance and moral reference in the world. That is, who is actually now deciding what is good and what is bad in terms of how this world is being ruled and how this is going. And there is an increasing effort in multilateral forums to establish new formats, new rules, to replace the old kind of sense of security that exists and that is gone now, that will and would force governments and civil societies to follow an agreed path of shared norms and beliefs and practices. And in this process where new modes of global governance are being actively searched by both, so to say, the elites and the lower strata of society or the civil society, also the activities of religious actors become important because they are involved in this process of giving meaning to the world as it exists and as it interacts. So they are involved in a process of rule setting, of norm setting. The activities of religious actors and also in particular of Muslim actors from South Asia are involved in the process of setting up, of establishing moral frames, moral references for global shared living and global governance. What is right and what is wrong, in ways that are not dissimilar to a moral revolution and a political revolution that happened in the 60s and 70s with the left and green movements that were moving around the world in different parts. Why? For instance, take a very practical example to understand this: Islamic banking. Islamic banking is trying to establish certain moral norms, ethical frames for a particular activity that are supposed to be inclusive and not at the expense of people investing in particular. That's not so dissimilar from green banking, which exists very parallel. So both these systems, let's say the green moral reference system and the Islamic reference system, they are currently involved in the process of discussing, setting up moral frames where they are using the religious activities for shaping the world in their own way. And also setting up rules where they help, so to say, the interaction of people living in different parts of the world. Because groups from South Asia, like the Tablighis or like the Minhajul Quran or other groups, it is not that they are reduced only to religious interventions, because the way they interact, as people are involved, people also use them to follow other social interests and needs. What do I mean by these very abstract words? For instance, to give you again some practical example, in the Tabligh Jamaat it is quite common in universities in South Asia that students join the Tabligh Jamaat in order to travel around the world for no money. To basically go from one country to another, so it is some sort of piety tourism, which can be, and I don't mean it even negatively, taken literal and seriously, as I encountered in Jakarta, where I was when doing field research and interviewing Tabligh activists, activists who are working for the Tabligh Jamaat. One of them was a travel agent. So he was actually organizing some of these tours. For instance, another format in the Tabligh Jamaat is the travel of couples, women with a male guardian, and they are traveling in groups. So that's then, from his perspective, taken in a very practical and mundane sense, it's an experienced travel agency which gives you additional value for your money by, so to say, following the pursuit of your moral preferences. Something which you find also in green value inclined middle classes in Germany, where they set up these particular travel agencies where you can get particularly educated travel guides giving you a value tour of China, where you will not go to the regular shopping malls, but really go to cultural centers with genuine, so to say, whatever genuine is, memories or memorials or buildings. This is exactly the sort of process that's happening there, where religious activities are social activities. That's very important to understand. There are ways to connect with this world and with an imagined or real, it doesn't matter, hereafter, where you connect with various value systems, and that can have very practical consequences. For instance, the Minhaj al-Quran, which in the West operates very actively, has its branches in many parts of Western Europe, Britain, Scandinavia, also collecting a lot of money for their own organization from their middle class membership, but they also have established centers which basically give legal and social advice to migrants, where people can go to also engage in oral conversation and feel at home, and give them a home abroad somewhere else in the world which otherwise has become unrooted in terms of space and identities and living space. And of course, it is this particular way which is interesting me. How do Muslim actors and institutions and networks make sense of the world and their global intervention? And this can be done, again, on two levels, in religious or doctrinal terms and in so-called secular or social terms. In doctrinal terms, they are having the concept of this world and the hereafter. They use the idea of this world to prepare for the hereafter, but they need to do certain things right or wrong in this world in order to be eligible for a better position in the hereafter, in the paradise and not in hell, whatever religion that is. And there is this reference in some of the hadiths and the traditions of the Prophet. If you're doing something good, you're earning sawab. What you can call piety points, like collecting rebate points, like from a shopping chain, a shopping mall, when you have your card and constantly book more and more points until you have collected so and so many. that you can actually enter, so to say, a preferred seat or place or lodge to paradise. And the Tabligis have kind of perfected the system by introducing more and new categories of sawab points. They will award you like 500 points for this, for a 4-month Jamaat, they will, you earn so and so many sawab points. So it's very detailed, what in one of my research articles called faith bureaucracy, where you have, so to say, a piety point earning system which ties you to this world in a moral and systematic way. Then, of course, the secular way of the world making is how the life of Muslim communities themselves is influenced, that they also see the communities in the place they live and try to give certain benefits to them, where also the stereotypes, for instance, about gender segregations are challenged by the social realities. To give you another example, that in Europe, for instance, in a lot of Muslim communities, in the mosques of those people who arrived and were living there second, third generation, there are more women actually activists employed in the Muslim community than men. There is me, and it is actually the women who, I mean, like in Asia, in every family, it's the woman who decides who has the key for the room where the alcohol is stored, and the men just have to ask for it. And so it is there that in a Muslim mosque community, there are like 5, 6, 7 women employed. They teach children, they give certain classes, they give certain advice, and there's maybe one imam, and the men are definitely in this system in the minority. So that is another form of world making which has to be seen and taken seriously in all its dimensions, in its religious dimension, its social dimension, in its cultural dimension, and it also evolves through various stages. From in the migration situation from the original ethnic mosque, they will later evolve to local language mosques and communities where you have the German or the English or the French speaking communities, mosque communities, and then often you have also a generation problem or issue that children want to segregate themselves from the ethnic and cultural Islam of their parents and start supporting what is nowadays called as a shortcut the urban Salafi Islam, which is supposedly primarily focusing attention on principles and not on culturally defined practices and rituals from the areas where they come, and that is equally true for also Muslims from South Asia. Since I skipped here a number of, so I'm trying, no, this doesn't work. Doesn't work, I'm sorry. I will be only able to during this process of expansion, what I find quite important and interesting is that the different foreigners that come from South Asia, like the supposedly Salafi Deobandis, the Barilwis, the Al-Hadis and the Tabligis, there is a contestation and there is a competition over their doctrine and over their theology. That Why I am saying it and finding it important, because there are a lot of stereotypes whether the Salafis are good or bad, and whether the Sufis are good or bad, and whether Al-Hadith or militant or not militant. But the reality is much more complicated, that the ascriptions are actually overlapping. There is this very valuable sociological perspective concept by Bourdieu about the cultural capital, about the cultural field, the Islamic field, where religious actors are seen as producing some sort of a cultural capital or a religious capital that is converted into social positions, into social results and products. There are various ways how these Islamic Muslim actors are segregated and differentiated. One is to differentiate between reformism, traditionalism, or modernism. Then the groups are variously thrown into these categories, even though I would argue in all the traditions you can find all three directions, reformists, traditionalists, and modernists. If you look closely enough, you have the ascriptions of Islam or Reformation, adherence of Taqlid and independent reasoning or Ijtihad. But the Muslim groups to some extent combine these and develop subtypes of these concepts. And in the process of growth and global expansion, there are happening gliding shifts in the doctrine. For instance, the Deobandis are supposedly reformist, purist, Islahi, but actually they are never anti-Sufi, despite their opposition to the Barelvis, because they regard not only as acceptable but indispensable the concept of tasawwuf, because it is in part of their schedule and part of their teaching, a part of their curriculum. That is the Sufi, the spiritual teachings which are in close conformity with what they understand the Quran and the Hadith, and do not go beyond those documents. There are other gliding shifts and contradictions. The Al-Hadith, for instance, they reject or accept all law schools, cut themselves off from Sufi practices and call themselves Salafi, but at the same time they are not Wahhabi, because the Wahhabi are following a law school. So there is a clear distinction between the Al-Hadith and the Wahhabi, and from a doctrinal perspective, a very important one. The Jamaat Islami combines doctrinal orthodoxy with political modernity and oppositional politics. The Barelvis are supposedly only traditionalist Taqlid, but over the years they started copying the Deobandis and their madrasas and their institutions, and their teaching in their madrasas basically is not so significantly different in their alim course from the teaching in the Deobandi system. That's the Dars al-Nizami, the 8-year course, and they combine it with loyalist politics. And the Ahmadiyya, for instance, they combine doctrinal conservatism. For instance, their pressure regarding dress code is one of the most severe actually in the larger Islamic field, with social modernity, where women are basically forced in their communities in South Asia and abroad to educate themselves and put into particularly designed colleges, with hyper-political loyalism to whatever government is in power, which is not only true of the colonial era, but also in the countries where they still operate currently. And then we have in the Aligarh tradition the interesting combination with the exclusive focus on the Quran, cutting themselves off, so to say, from the Hadith, and at the same time a rationalist reading of it, and promoting ijtihad, which in the past, proven historically, has led to the fact that there were some overlaps and some changes in between the Aligarh tradition and the Al-Hadith. People switched between these traditions because they found them very close to each other. So there is a global competition, diversification. At the same time, there is an ideological convergence and there is a cross-group overlap on these systems. Therefore, I prefer to define these groups or these traditions, the South Asian traditions in particular, as religio-cultural milieus, because I think they are more complex than just a doctrinal tradition. In fact, they are social networks with a very strong cultural aspect, and they are internally differentiated. Every one of them has organization for women, organization for students, has a Dawa format, and has also modernist subgroups which operate in political fields. So we are having here religio-cultural life worlds which extend from their South Asian origins across the world. Okay, I would propose we go to, yes, there are, and the formats of interaction are in the doctrine or practice, centers, places of worship, internationally speaking, religious organization, political parties, missionary movements, and just as I mentioned, welfare organizations, which they almost all have, women, students, children's organizations, global centers and networks. There has been an evolution and change in these global actors and intensification since the 70s and expansions, where definitely the Islamic Revolution in Iran played an important role. Also an interesting element to realize that the Sunni world exploded globally after a Shia Islamic Republic was being created, which shows the high share of the political element in this expansion and not just the religious element. We are facing a market situation, a competition for followers, a severe competition where you need to follow branding, where you need to present yourself, where you need to show yourself. So I would like to show you these in the regular format. I just hope that the computer will allow me actually to do it, because there's something going on in the background which I could not eliminate so far. I'm sorry about that. I want to see if I can close something that is creating a problem, but I don't think I'll be able to do that. Okay, so we just have to do with whatever we can here. Right. So okay, this is the school in Deoband. That was the research I did about 10-12 years ago. In the meantime, I have actually published a couple of articles on the Deoband system, several more than a couple, especially touching the new developments in after their centenary celebrations, when there was actually a split in the school and a new branch or sub-school emerged, the Darul Waqf, which is based on a family feud, as simple as that, where even until today in the madrasa system, the family line is still a very important contribution and factor, and this is a factor which has to do with the Sufi tradition, in spite of the fact that we are looking at the purist or Salafi, if some might argue, system, because there is the belief that the barakah will be going down in the family line in most unhindered ways and in most beneficial ways. So the Deobandis, and in particular over the years I looked at two systems in greater detail. One is the Deobandi Tablighi system, and the other one is the modernist international Islamic universities, which are equally not exclusively connected to South Asia, but also very strongly rooted in South Asia, in the International Islamic University in Islamabad. And I also understand there is which I will briefly show later, there is an Islamic university of a similar profile in Kerala, actually, which also exists already almost 40 years, which combines secular and religious education. So these two systems have their symbolic centers in Deoband and in the International Islamic University in Islamabad. And the centers of the Tabligh Jamaat we apparently obviously find in Nizamuddin and in Rawalpindi. Here we have the historical picture of Deoband, and we see the statistical data of the international students at Deoband, which are very interesting because they show changing focuses, regional focuses over the years of the different impact and different attraction for different regions. And I must say that on the last instance, 10, 12 years ago, they were very welcoming and very open to share those data with me. They let me work in their archive, and if I follow their internal bureaucracy, because they themselves are still a reflection of the time of the Mughal administration, so to say, where you have to ask for everything in a very elaborately in Urdu written application that has to go through various desks, and then when the Muhtamim has agreed to it, then it can be done. And once they understand that you're a proper academic and they're not working for any intelligence agency, and there are no intelligence agents who write academic articles in peer-reviewed journals, so I can always show them on the website, okay, these are the articles which are published here, you can check. So then they will be also trusting you. So in that sense I was rather positively surprised by the openness in sharing their information and their data. So you see certain emphasis on certain regions like Africa, which is mostly South Africa, and the very vocal Muslim minority there. Malaysia, for instance. Then there had been a surge of students from France at some time. Well, the South Asian countries, that's obvious. Bangladesh. Afghanistan was during particular years. So you see over a certain period of time a particular emphasis and particular strong point of particular regions. And they are, so to say, not necessarily expected. Number 4 is Malaysia, and number 5 is Africa or South Africa in particular. And in the later section of the presentation, I will actually show now more pictures from these two regions to give you an idea how the religious institutions look, which have a direct organic connection with South Asia. So we have, in the end, as a product of this interaction of Deoband with the outside world, a rather widespread network. And we must say that the expansion of Deobandi madrasas outside South Asia is primarily a product of Tablighi activism, because establishing their centers or markers in different parts of the world has often gone along with establishing a madrasa with an alim course. And because South Asia is also seen in many parts of the Muslim world still as a source of authentic knowledge, where, so to say, the cultural influence of the West is comparatively low, and where at the same time the very structured course, alim course of the Dars Nizami with 8 years, with schools and classes, is for them an enviable object of and resource of structured Islamic knowledge. Of course, it is slightly ironic that this structured Islamic course came about as an influence or an adaptation of Islamic learning in British India to the British Western tradition, because when Deoband was founded, it was by no means conservative, but it was rather outragingly modernist, because it copied formats from British colleges, because the madrasa did not have before regular classes, a regular schedule, sitting, teaching, examinations, entrance examinations. So all these are actually influences of the Western education that had established itself in British India by the middle of the 19th century, when Deoband was a rather challenging modernist product. So this is a plan of a ijtima of the Tabligh Jamaat in Pakistan. It is also interesting to look at the different formats which are being used and how these formats are expanding across the universe of different Muslim actors. The Ijtima has now become a very common and very popular format that is very closely followed in South Asia and attracting a lot of followers. In fact, there is an Ijtima season both of the Tabligh Jamaat, which starts in Pakistan, continues in India and follows in Bangladesh, but also of the different Islamic actors, where, for instance, in Pakistan, after the Tablighis comes the Jamaat Islamic, then comes the GUI, then comes the Al Hadith, so that you can basically have a roadshow of all these different actors in all these organizations. And the plan is remarkable because it assigns particular place and particular functions to particular groups and regions, and also to the foreigners participating, because there's always a very strong foreign presence. Actually, it can remind you of the old communist system, which was organized in very similar ways, with its meetings and with its convocations and with its internal ideological bureaucracy. Here you see the masses converging near Raimin in Pakistan, a picture shared by a local journalist. This picture I took myself. And here you have the similar plan from the Ijtima in Bhopal. Because the same annual Salana Ijtima to Bhopal mein bhi ho raha hai. And the people are addressing the new star. When I first 10, 12 years was observing, there was Maulana Saad. So he was, and it was like what we call in German Inszenierung. It was almost like a stage, perfect, so to say, current pop culture. His uncle would be there, who died in between. And Maulana Saad was the young and energetic person with a lot of enigma, and he would come in the black shalwar kameez to stand out against the others. And he was like the rock star who was basically being admired and spreading a lot of emotional capital, so to say, and affinity which all the followers would share. And he would always also travel to other ijtimas, and then his speech would be a highlight of the event where everybody comes. The other player in the field I mentioned is the international system of the International Islamic University. They are combining secular education with religious education, and here one must make the distinction that in the madrasa system currently there is a new path towards hybrid madrasas which teach both a religious curriculum, maybe the Hafiz or a reduced Alim course, and then also the national curriculum or vocational training. Here in the International Islamic University, you will be having to choose between a religious faculty and a secular faculty. But it is an environment where you have a basic training in Arabic in the beginning and a basic training in religious subjects, usuluddin, but for a limited period, but then you will be separating. The system of the International Islamic University is a system facilitating Muslim middle classes having a new different life. It's a format which is also very popular in Southeast Asia, where what sometimes disparagingly is called shopping mall Islamism, where actually you find ways to combine good life with following your moral frames and your piety requirements, where these are not seen as contradiction, where believing in something does not mean you have to be poor to be a good Muslim. And these formats try to, so to say, facilitate a life where this combination is possible. So these are the Dawah Academy you can see, and the other academies, the religious academies, and here the secular faculties, engineering and technology, Institute of Islamic Economics, basic and applied sciences. There's also social sciences and political science, but there's also the Usuluddin faculty. The old building in Islamabad of the old of the mosque, and this is the new one. On the campus of this International Islamic University, you have a strong activism of student bodies, which is also quite interesting, and where all the parties, the religious and the secular, are active in doing dawah and in doing various activities. This is just a brief review of those posters of student activists at that time. And here we have a combination, a composition of the foreign students for one particular year, because the profile is different of what international students were attracted. Because in the 90s there was a phase, a stage, where studying at the International Islamic University was seen as some sort of Islamic plus political activism for a new anti-Western world, because the end of the Cold War by many Islamic activists, not only by bin Laden, was seen as removing the control of the West and opening the opportunity for a new life, for a new society, and being ready to push for this new life and this new society by activism which combined with various conflicts in parts of the world. That's why you see people also from Bosnia and from other areas where there was conflict. So some of the groups that were attending those the international, also Afghanistan, a high number, were actually involved in the activist scene of groups that also had, yes, connection with militant outfits, even though in between they separated themselves largely from it. The number of foreign students has largely declined. The Saudi financing of the International Islamic University, which existed at one time, had basically been practically reduced, and it is, by all practical means, has become a public university. Yet, unfortunately or fortunately don't want to do it as a value judgment under the PPP President Zardari. The Saudi Arabia managed to re-establish at least a nominal hold on the university by, so to say, imposing a rector of their own from Saudi Arabia directly, who arrived at the university. Here is the website of the Indian equivalent, and here you see the global network of the international Islamic universities. So just quickly, because time I have already used a lot, here you see the office of the Jamaat Ulema in Johannesburg, which is quite active for a long time in South Africa. Here you see the Didat Center in Durban, Didat from this region here, Mumbai, the teacher of Zakir Naik, even though they follow very different takes on Islam, but nevertheless a connection. The Didat Center, various mosques in South Africa that have connections with South Asia. The Peace University in Cape Town. And here, this are very interesting, these two madrasas I was able to visit, established by the Tablighi Jamaat, both Deobandi madrasas in Zakariaville and in Azadville. Both of them big establishment, and you can see comparatively posh buildings, because being a member of the so-called Indian Muslim minority is actually, you belong to the middle class and you have a higher income because they're already a privileged position during apartheid years. And this continues in social terms, and it is also attracting international madrasa students who don't want to undergo the severity of attending a very simple life at the Deoband madrasa with very simple food, hot and spicy, and here they have AC, here they can be driven in the BMW by their parents, and so it's a much more interesting experience, so to say, for which they pay. So there is no big difference then for these kids coming from Canada and from the US to go to this school, between them and those Germans who go to Rishikesh and do this sort of renovation experience, mental whatever, holiday or stay to rejuvenate their spiritual kind of lives. So it's a global format of interaction, which is, that is basically my point, to show the normality of the Muslim actors in the global frame. To see that they are engaging in formats that cannot per se regarded with suspicion, but have to be taken seriously on their social values, on their different dimensions on which they act. Here you see the other school with clean and investment grade cars. And we have, of course, the Tablighi presence in Dewsbury in England, where the Tablighi presence is basically influencing whole parts of the city close to the Markas, which also houses a Deobandi madrasa, and a madrasa here, we must say, which was like several others of the Deobandi, founded and inspired by Zakaria, the co-founder of the Tablighi Jamaat, who himself was a Sufi sheikh of significant importance, because part of the Tablighi success globally rests on his network of disciples, which combines the Sufi legacy with the Salafi claims that some of the Tablighi leaders or members are making. And in Dewsbury, the particular part of the city is following strict moral guidelines, so that all bars had to close down, even voluntarily, because there were no customers coming anymore. And there is strict gender separation, and people will be having particular outfits when they go in the street. Whether this is a segregation or not, whether this is a parallel society or not, it is a judgment depending on your perspective. Whether this is separating them from Britain or uniting them with Britain, they argue, and also some politicians argue, they are actually socially rehabilitating the second, third migrant generation, because there is no street crime, there is no loitering, the young boys don't go astray, so there is solidity, there is employment, there is education, so that means also social integration. There are no council houses as states. So it really depends how you look at it, whether you look at it as a segregation or as an integration, depending where you emphasize the values or what you want to know. This is the Darul Uloom in Holcombe, Bury, the British system has a very liberal system where private schools are being overseen and evaluated, but also accepted and partly co-funded publicly. The madrasas in Britain for their contribution to the public education system, because they can stand in for a particular specialization in the later stage of secondary education with Arabic and Islamic studies. Southeast Asia, the International Islamic University, of course, you will have some activism, which also is not unfamiliar in India, such slogans and such demands. And you have a Pakistan mosque in Kuala Lumpur, another madrasa in a rather poorer environment. And this madrasa is actually one which has connections to the Nadwa. The Nadwa, and it's in West Malaysia, a very long, a very old tradition. One of the less fortunate aspects of influence that involves is when I was there, they were just holding a seminar on how painful the Ahmadiyya are. And the person here where I was present in the background, who I could only out of politeness take the picture from the backside with the white turban, that is Nick Aziz. I don't know if you know who he was or is. He was the chief minister of the Malaysian state of Kelantan and a leading figure, religious mentor of the past party, of the religious party. And he himself is a graduate of Deoband. And he combines, what brings me back to my first theoretical part, the political activism of the Jamaat-e-Islami type PAS politics with the conservative and theological emphasis of the Deoband system. And in the environment of the markas in Malaysia, you have shops selling the Muslim clothes known for South Asia, which are becoming some sort of Tablighi uniform the world over, sometimes positively, sometimes disparagingly connotated as Indian group or Indian movement or Indian Muslims. At the same time, one has to mention here that the Tablighi Jamaat stands out in its global activism by being able to jump over what I call the ethnic barrier. Why? Because it has been able to go entirely native in a number of countries where all the members are local Muslims and where they are seen as a normative actor of Islam. While it is largely South Asian diaspora on which they draw their members in Britain or even in the US, it is in France, in Central Asia, in Malaysia, Indonesia, in the Maghreb, where they almost entirely are relying on local activism of local members and conducting all their activities also in the local languages. The Tablighi Center in Jakarta, where also in the same way the attributes are being sold. This is the Tabligh Center in East Java, where an entire village is basically controlled by the Tabligh Jamaat with several schools, one of them teaching the Deobandi curriculum. And I was able to speak to a round of teachers who graduated from madrasas in South Asia in Urdu. There are at least among them at least a group of 15-20 teachers who were fluent in Urdu because they had graduated from madrasas in Pakistan and India. For instance, this guy who graduated actually from madrasa in Gujarat, and then after that went to Pakistan also and attended another madrasa there. Yeah, with this picture I basically come to the conclusion, which are brief. There are new and modern formats combined with older ones. There's an expansion of the whole system. There's a growing similarity of formats. There's a tendency to grow more ideological for some of these groups, but also more development-oriented in an NGO world which we are facing today, which has to do with this search for new modes and references of governance. So they are involved in acts of marking and making place and space for Muslim communities in global exchange. And with these words I want to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think it was a real treat to understand the South Asian Muslim community. In the times when there is a particular stereotype about the Muslim community which emerges from the popular perceptions being disseminated through the phenomenon of terror, actually that's the most dominant perception, and in contrast we see the reality so rich and diverse which has come out so flowingly through this brilliant lecture which our professor has given us. So with this, I think I will open the floor for some couple of questions from the audience. Most welcome. That's okay, Professor?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So somebody can help me with the mic?
Sorry.
One can introduce oneself and then ask the question.
Amazing lecture, and you very nicely titled it Muslim Global Actors, because most of the actors we were not even, at least I was not even familiar with, and my eyes popped out when you spoke about the spread of Tablighi Jamaat and how far, in fact some of them like Sirajul Quran, till now I don't understand who they are and what they do, in spite of, I think we have been Muslims for 7 generations, so it doesn't make familiar sound in the head. But anyway, it was very, very nice. And another one is a reflection, not a question either, that now I know the why world looks at Muslims as one monolith, one homogeneous variety of people, without even realizing that there are types within types within types and bi-types and subtypes, and Muslims perhaps, I mean there must be many more like me who are not even aware of the subtypes. I didn't, in fact it became a news to me when you were talking about Deobandi school being favorable to Sufi Wahdatul Wujud concept, which was strange because it had always come to us that they do not believe in the concept of Sufism and they are opposed to that. So you have opened up vast vistas of thought processes, and I hope we go back home and read more about it. Thank you.
I think I have a slightly different kind of question. You have shown us how Deobandis have spread all over, but Deobandis are very influenced by the Saudi Salafi or Wahhabi kind of approach. And when they have spread all over, are they also not spreading a very standard version of what Islam is today. And I don't know whether the syllabus is different in these different places, but at least just in a general sort of way, we do tend to see, I think many of us have observed the kind of, say, rise in even women wearing the black burqa, which we didn't see earlier, as much as we see today. And so I just have a question that they're spreading there, but is there, are they also spreading a certain very standard version of what it means to be a Muslim?
I would say that I was trying, in fact, to give the to cover this group, the Deobandis, in a slightly different way, not only as a religious group, but also as a social and as a cultural group. If we go by the teachings, I think it is a media and a political shortcut to basically reduce them to Saudi Salafi influence. That's precisely what I was trying to explain, that the Deobandis can also be seen as some sort of a very local, meaning South Asian format that has traveled to other regions under certain conditions for providing precisely this local identity kind of connectivity to the people. Why? Because Saudi Arabia, Saudis, Arabs do not really prefer to go to a Deobandi mosque. For them, to put it very strictly, several of them regard the Deobandi and even more the Bareilly system rather with suspicion. And there is a belief that they are not really true principled Muslim, precisely also because partly of the enduring influence of certain Sufi connection traditions. As I said, the Deobandis cannot be called Salafi and Saudi in that very strict sense, because they have never cut themselves off completely from Sufi connections. They have always accepted Sufism as long as it is Quran compliant. In fact, if we go in detail, it is very particular specific rituals which they oppose only in Sufism, in the Bareillis, and that is particularly shrine worship. It is particularly the assumption that blessing of God can travel through a shrine and through a shrine holder. Those are completely opposed, those are completely rejected. But there are many other practices and concepts and beliefs in the spiritual side of Islam that is in the more learned tradition called Tasawwuf and not Sufism. And they have integrated it in their teaching. They have, for instance, the tradition of a teacher who gives bayat to students, which is some sort of a person. In every Deobandi madrasa exists a teacher who is, so to say, well, in secular schools we have the teacher who is responsible for complaints and everything. So this kind of teacher is the one who is supposed to be the emotional, so to say, response person. The only difference the Deobandis make is they give bayat in parallel 3 or 4 tariqas together. But then the bayat exists and the emotional connection exists, and they are seen as sheikh and they are sheikhs. So Sufi and Salafi formats cannot be seen as oppositional.
I do accept that, but even in the form of dress, they're spreading like the Tabligis. You pointed out that they're spreading a certain type of dress also.
Yeah, for instance, but this is very relational. For instance, when did the long veil or the black veil emerge? I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's invention of the 19th century or the 18th century. And the marking and the understanding of these clothing varies all the time. What is seen as, so we should be rather careful to ascribe ideological or political prejudice even to a type of clothing. For instance, the Indian shalwar kameez cloth is seen as here as a very local, desi, almost rural cloth, and suddenly suddenly it travels to Indonesia, and then it's seen as a normative Islamic cloth. So, so you see, that's how evaluations and how restrictions change. It is, I mean, and then the veil or the cover travels to France, and then it becomes a symbol of feminism and resistance, because it's the women, the Muslim women, who claim their public space, secure space from both men and secular society. And we see that the protest works just like burning the effigy in the JNU, that police people come and with pepper spray force the woman to undress. While we have covered dresses, not less covered, of women going bathing and swimming in China, in Southeast Asia, of people who are not Muslims and have this tradition for a long time. You go to any Chinese beach, so your question, if I may be slightly provocative, reveals the current prejudice of our era.
My question is slightly different. What, I mean, your, it's on. I mean, my question may be considered incorrect for today's talk, because you have really narrowed yourself down to world making from the margin of the Islamic world. What I found slightly problematic is the Muslimness, which was throughout the time, the stereotyped image of Muslim and Islam, which was throughout the time woven into the lecture. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that we, at least in India, I am not as knowledgeable as the gathering here, but still, you know, like we have fantastic secular movements conducted and carried on by Muslims, like Firangi Mahal movement, which was sort of a peasant movement, which was led by a Maulana. Again, we had Badruddin Tayebji's work. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that there are lots of Muslim actors which try to work beyond this very narrow stereotypical understanding of Muslimness or the Islamic world, but they were contributing towards being Muslim. They were trying to make another kind of world meaning. They were into let me just finish. And even now, if you will see that you know, so many Muslims are traveling across world. Like we have Newsweek chief Zakaria, and we have Azim Premji. What about their impact in the world meaning? What I'm trying to say is that somewhere the discourse should also go beyond the so-called narrow stereotypical Muslimness to include these other Muslims who are much more inclusive and perhaps trying to get out of this, you know, this stereotype.
No, I can understand what you mean, but let me briefly explain the academic side of this problem. The academic side of this problem is that Muslim identity by the word itself is still largely tied to religious activity, to a belief in a particular religion. And the question is, what is a Muslim? What is the approach you're taking? I was, I think I mentioned it somewhere, restricting myself to religious actors, to religious institutions. If you have the term secular Muslim, until very recently it was considered to be a contradiction in itself. How you can be a believer and at the same time be secular, because the consequence in terms of definitions is that you expand the meaning of Muslim beyond religious identity to a cultural identity. So is it justified to consider Muslim a cultural identity or not? Is it an identity politics issue or not? Then the next question is, what is secularism? secularism is very different depending on which context, in which country you are using it. In France, it is synonymous with giving your religion no space, not believing at all, being atheist, being anti-religious. In India, on the opposite scale in the world, it is synonymous with a separation of state and religion, where the state has actually the responsibility to protect one religion against the other, and even the non-believers. Can you see the wide gap of meaning between these two interpretations? Then you have the timeline. Today, the usage of the word secular in India has almost become synonymous of defending being a Muslim. I've in recent conversations so many times, but we are a secular country, but I can be a Muslim here and don't have to be a Hindu, so I can follow another religion. So these terms constantly undergo changes in meaning depending on the context, on the debate in which they are being used. And as in every academic study, you have to define some of the limits, otherwise you are in a broad field. And as I specifically mentioned at the beginning, I'm not taking a political nor an activist position. I was limiting myself to institutions which are operating in the religious field. When I refer to Bourdieu, saying specifically, this is the Islamic field, this is the religious field where actors operate in the name of religion, and I was trying to show that while they operate in the name of religion, they also do something else. So this was my limited objective.
With the permission of chair, can I?
Yeah. Because it's very interesting. Yes, before you agree, because the topic, this whole question has raised a lot of things. Like when we are talking of these Muslim actors, where do we place, as you correctly said, people like Khan Khan, Maulana Muller, that is one. And because I had in mind that these are the type of personalities we can also be talking of when we are talking of these Muslim actors in South India. Just to supplement your point. And then this secularism being anti-religion, because I have very limited experience of Pakistan, but there also secularism word is translated as Ladinium, if I am right, something like being anti-religion. So there is no concept that you can be something like Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who is a Muslim as well as an Indian secular in full particular capacity. That's very confusing, so I think you can carry on.
I just want to add one thing. I don't want to get into the debate of religion and secularism, because in itself can, take us to at least 2 more hours or something like that. But I would like to say, coming from an academician, and there my basic submission is, coming from the academician, we all know that nothing can be apolitical. Everything is political, and your disposition is also political. I'm sorry to state that. Because I personally feel that in today's world, the task of academicians, and in fact every person who is speaking on Muslim or any community, is to break this homogeneity which the political actors are making and which is creating lots of damage to the community. We have to stop treating a community, and especially you started with local and global. This homogeneity which is coming in terms of census, which is influencing policy making at world level, is really killing the communities, damaging the interactions. I don't want to get into religion secularism debate. I'm talking about the practical.
No, but what I find important to emphasize here, is that if we view Muslims from the perspective of the community here as such, we are ending up with an ethnic concept, because those communities are defined by being born into particular circumstances beyond your choosing. And this means that is a concept which is primarily an ethnic cultural concept. So we have, that's what I'm trying to emphasize. One has to be rather careful. I'm not meant to say that this is apolitical what I'm saying, but when I'm talking about activism, when I'm talking about political impact, I would be talking about the things that our chairman in the beginning explained, how I will be influencing a particular situation, how I want to change and how I organize certain things. I was deliberating myself to analyzing a particular situation, taking it apart and taking the various meanings apart. And there is still, so to say, the jury is still out to what extent we can, how to say, fuse the meaning of Muslim community in an ethnic cultural tradition where you're being born into with the religious definition of it, that this is a community of believers. And that is an ambivalence we have to live with. Definitely we have to spell it out and we have to say it. But all I want to say, these are different takes. So when you are rightly mentioning it, you are discussing an issue which I deliberately excluded.
Yeah, just procedure. I think we will have 3-4 questions at the same time. Then you will respond. Okay.
What my friend said just now, adding on to that how come all our identities, everybody have multiple identities. Everybody has multiple identities. How come of late, being a Muslim, we've lost each and every identity of ours excepting one, Muslim. Wherever you go, whatever class of people you're mingling with, whatever ethnicity, nationality, one question is which religion. I'll just take half a second. I play Scrabble online with 10 people from 10 different countries, and we talk also on the side. The first question they ask is, which religion do you belong to? And my reply would be, ha ha ha. Then it will be Muslim. Oh, you are in dire trouble. So that is one identity which is dominating over every other identity. You're a teacher, you are a Maharashtrian, you are Indian. Nothing else matters.
Yeah. I think Ritu, Jyoti, then I think
I think one of the most important is really what we are debating today, and that is the issue of multiple identities. And now, I think a very linear way of seeing a particular identity. So that's why the location of your analysis, I think, is really very important and very crucial. And that is the religious, cultural milieu, what you were talking about, and all the globalization and the globalities. I think that's very important. So, because this, the way it plays out, particularly, at least for me, most important in the context of Kashmir, and the interpretation and the misinterpretation, and so you also get terms which I think at some level would also very much be there. That in the beginning you have the context of Islamization, all this is in quotes, alright? And of course the first attack is always on women. Whether it's in terms of clothes, what we've already spoken about, or in terms of, say, music, which is very inherent to the Kashmiri Muslim and Hindu, again in quotes. The term now, and which in a way differentiates from religion and separates from religion, is a new phrase in the last 3 or 4 years, which is Arabization. Okay, so now you go to Kashmir, first the concept of Islamization, whatever, reproductive rights, etc., whether Hizbul Mujahideen was doing it or somebody else was doing it. The term now, and this manifests itself in many different kinds of ways, including very particularly in the last 1.5 years, what I've noticed, is instead of Ramzan, they now use terms like Ramadan, which is so is that a religious component or it's a whole religious with a political connotation? And politics, of course, none of us can get away from, because everything we say is that. So, these kinds of concepts in terms of the multiple identities or not, which identity is primary at which particular point. I think that also, so whether it's during the riots or whether it's during education or whether it's in Kashmir or, I think it just depends on, so that's why the integration of that process, I think, in the broader political, the globalization and the globalities, I think that is
crucial. Jyoti.
I just had a very short question that some of the Taliban people have been educated in Devan, especially many of the leaders as well as the fighters.
Not in Darul Dewan.
Not in that.
In which Devan?
There are thousands of Deobandi.
But they follow the Deobandi syllabus, right?
What does that mean? That is the big question.
Because that is what we were told that they do follow. I thought they are from Indian Deoband, but I just wanted to ask that how come the Deoband in India has not produced that kind of mentality, whereas the same institution or the same syllabus has produced the jihadi mentality outside India.
Sorry, before he talks on this, my own understanding is that this mainly Taliban element, as most of them were trained in the Pakistan madrasas located in Pakistan. One of which was there, this Lal Masjid Amir, one very brilliant. And in that there is more of a, whatever I tried to understand, there is more influence of Wahhabi Islam, whatever that means. Some people question that also. They will see, but question is foundationally it may come the same thing. But the way it was twisted in Pakistani madrasa, because the module which was prepared mainly in Washington. So it was interaction.
No, let's not indulge too much into political sling mongering because I just need to correct that what you said because it is not true actually. The fact, let's rather stick to the facts because the radicalization of the Taliban, in my humble opinion, has nothing to do with religion because it was, so to say, a deliberate process which was manipulated by the system. This is not even a general Deobandi curriculum they were coming out, but there were a number of madrasas that were specifically created for this purpose to train these orphans from the earlier civil war for this particular purpose. And the Deobandi curriculum, maybe you don't even know what it means. It is basically a very conservative, old-fashioned and very complicated classical curriculum of studying sources, and it does not say much about any sort of militant or otherwise activity. It is the intervention of non-religious factors in their education which basically manipulated the system. That is the bigger problem. And that had also, again, nothing to do with, so to say, the Deobandi curriculum in itself, as it's a rather loose system which is loosely following a particular orientation where you have groupings and orientations with different leaders, a more Sufi-inspired wing like Maulana Tanavi, if you are familiar with him, and the more political orientation with the still very active and robust Madani family, and so on. So there we need really to know our text and we really need to know the facts.
Another question is quite basic. Can we see there exists any Islamic culture? Now, Dr. Asghar engineer is to speak about composite culture in India. I also say that the composite culture we talk of is the North Indian culture which is seen in Pakistan and is similar in North India. Now differently, there are areas in India where parallel cousin marriage is not allowed among the Muslims. They have to go for cross-cousin marriage. In case of Indonesia, there are certain rituals among the Muslims where they get certain crocodiles get married once a year. Yeah. But lastly, in case of Kaaba in Mecca itself, the Kaaba is circumambulated 7 times around by the Muslim pilgrims. And on the way from Mecca to Medina, the people they prepare stones at certain stone pillars, which are known as certain evil spirits. Now, the building structures that we see in Central Asia, we talk about Islamic culture, Islamic shrines. I will beg to differ it. What we see in Central Asia, they are Central Asian part of Central Asian culture, and which we are trying to emulate in other parts of the world.
Well, I would simply say that Islamic culture is simply a synonym for a very heterogeneous interpretation of local practices and rituals which are conducted in the name of Islam, let's put it that way. And there is nobody out to judge what is genuine, what is not, as I just explained, the shifting meaning of particular clothes items in particular. So is the meaning of particular practices also shifting, declining all the time. It is negotiated. It is a process of negotiation of society and the public, what is given a particular meaning at a particular level, because there is no inherent meaning. These meanings are negotiations, and they reflect a particular level of understanding and development. For instance, if you, regarding multiple identities, I used a particular selective focus because you cannot always cover every single perspective. It is impossible. And the Muslim community beyond those who regard themselves as active believers is definitely larger. But it would not prevent anyone in South Asia to, when they are asked what are you, to say I am Marathi, I am Punjabi, I am anything else. The difference is that in South Asia, because of the historical composition of the cultural and social fabrics, the terms of certain religions and certain subgroups in the religion has taken on ethnic and cultural social meanings, which they not necessarily have in other parts of the world. That's why here, immediately, there is a direct connotation to a social community, which is not always given there. You can still fight the battle in France. You say, I'm Muslim, no, I'm French, no, I'm actually Algerian or Moroccan, just living in France. Every one of three Israel, because the constitution of the community concept is more flexible. Here in South Asia, we have a division of the society over the years, through the thousands of years of the caste system, where religion, where ethnic identities and occupations lead to a threefold definition. The Hindu weavers of this area, the Muslim artisans of that area, which in themselves is a product of the history of this subcontinent and cannot be easily generalized and transferred, because the association with the religion is very relative. That's why I was not going into the issue of Muslim society and Muslim community as large. I was going into the particular nature and structure of religious activists and trying to show from that lens that even they are also social in nature and having a very different and diverse composition, without denying the other self-understanding definition of Muslim community, whether secular or otherwise, or pluralistic or in a larger sense, which would go much beyond the topic what I was covering.
We can probably have one more question or a comment before I give the floor to Dr. Varis. Yeah, I think. Hello. Yeah.
Myself Ismail, I'm doing research at Tata Institute. I have done research on secular contents of madrasa curriculum. I have done research Maharashtra only. So I could say that recently madrasas are coming out from their space to a very open platform, and they also engaged with the public education system very recently. But I experienced that there are lots of madrasas are giving, following the curriculum of Urdu medium schools. Meanwhile, they are also giving the course of Alim course, and they are also supporting the public education, and they are also coming out, and later on they will join to the university education system, which is there for degree or other courses. So I could say that we can't say madrasas are restricted to a Sufi religious spaces only.
Well, no, that's accepted, and basically is in line what I was saying, that a number of madrasas are partially or more integrating so-called national curricula or public education in different quantities. In the North India, less than in South India, we must say. But this is a process which is happening and which we must also recognize as scholars, driven by the market situation in which these actors are. Because parents want more value for their children coming out in terms of employment, in terms of security, in terms of benefits. So there is this push to change, and it may be probably more effective than other ideological or political pushes which they are facing.
Can we have a round of applause for questions?